Everybody, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. This is our weekly lecture series. The title of this lecture is a little different than usual. It's Practical Chess Advice for Intermediate Players. And the sponsor wants to remain anonymous, so the sponsor is anonymous. But thanks for sponsoring the lecture. So I thought I would do two things in the lecture. The sponsor had a lot of ideas. I'll try to incorporate some of those ideas in the lecture. But it is my lecture, and I've been giving practical chess advice my whole career. And I would say typically a lot of what I do in chess is practical, and the engines don't necessarily agree. I could give a lot of examples, but main example is my opening repertoire with black, which for the most part, the engines say are suspicious, but I get positions I like that I understand that my opponents often aren't familiar with. That's, I believe, why I beat the best player I ever beat, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, in the Pro Chess League a few years ago. You can look that game up on the internet. So I decided for this lecture, I would show some of my games because I understand my games and I understand what I was thinking from a practical point of view, and I can explain it easily to you. Then I thought, I want to find one strong grandmaster who I think is good at practical play, not necessarily playing the engine move, but playing the move that fits their style and their understanding of chess. And I decided that would be Anatoly Karpov. So first three things we're going to look at are Karpov games, and the next three games will be from my games, and hopefully that'll give you enough practical advice. The reason I'm showing you the first game, which is with Tony Miles, played in 1980, was there was a certain position that arose where Karpov could have sacrificed a piece and he didn't. And I want to tell you what Miles said about it, because I think it's a pretty important point. And other thing, from a practical point of view, is Miles didn't play openings recommended by engines, since it was 1980, and weren't recommended by other grandmasters. Other grandmasters would scoff at the way Miles played the opening. And again, chess is a practical game, so if you spend 90% of your studying time looking at games with engines and saying, engine doesn't like that, the engine doesn't like that, you're not going to improve your practical game. You're going to try to play like the engine, which is impossible, because engine sees 1,000 moves ahead, and you guys see 0 or 1 move ahead. So you can't play like an engine, and frankly, you can't play like a super grandmaster because they understand and see a lot more than you do. You have to do the best that you can do. And I don't want to make it look like it's all rosy, because first game I'm going to show you, even though this is a Karpov-centric lecture, Karpov actually loses. Man, the truth hurts. I talk about Karpov, then I'm like, here's a game you lost. Man, good thing Karpov's not here. He bitch slapped me. Okay, so Karpov played e4. Karpov plays e4 and d4, and sometimes c4. And Miles tried to get Karpov out of his comfort zone on move 1. After this game was played, this move didn't really become popular, but my dad started playing it because he liked this game. And he likes, when he was playing chess, he liked to get people out of their comfort zone and play his own way. So this is more about Miles than Karpov, but there's a critical position that we're going to get to. Okay, Miles played a6. Now, this game was played in Birmingham, England, and for reasons I don't understand, which I'm sure will be explained to me by people on YouTube in the comments, this was named the St. George defense. I'm not sure why. I think I knew why in 1980, but I forgot about it in 1981. And since this is 2025, I got nothing. My dad called it the Birmingham defense because the game was played in Birmingham, England. So my dad would say he plays the Birmingham. Nobody would know what he's talking about. Although I think if my dad said he played the St. George, still nobody would know what he's talking about. Okay, and the point of a6 is to play b5 and fianchetto the bishop. And that's what Miles did. Karpov plays classically in the center. Miles played b5. Of course, you can't play b5 here because white would take it with the bishop. So protecting b5. Karpov played knight f3. Miles attacked the e-pawn with bishop b7. Karpov developed a piece and defended the pawn. And it doesn't look like Karpov is trying to refute the opening and play hyper-aggressive, try to get a winning position on move 4. Karpov is just playing his normal game, solid, play in the center, develop the pieces, and he figures he'll get a good position because black played a6 and b5, and white's ahead in development, white has a bigger share of the center, etc. Okay, knight f6, attacking the pawn again. Terrible snap. Queen e2, defending his pawn. Of course, Karpov could play aggressively with e5. Then Miles would put his knight on d5, which is a very nice square for the knight. Karpov kept his pawn center duo. e6, Miles wants to develop his bishop. a4, and one of my rules, this is good practical advice, when somebody has a pawn on b5, then white should play a4. Because it's not really easy for black to make a nice move here. Black played c5 and ignored the pawn being attacked because the bishop on d3 is attacking the pawn, but it's also defending the pawn on e4. So if white keeps taking on b5 with the pawn, the bishop, then black can take on e4. Also, Miles is threatening c4, which wins the bishop. Bishop's trapped. So probably c5 surprised Karpov a little because he put pressure on b5. Now he saw Miles is threatening c4. So he took on c5. Bishop takes c5 and knight d2. Knight develops. It goes to d2, defending the pawn. Now b4 doesn't attack the knight. Karpov had played knight c3. And finally, Karpov is really threatening the b5 pawn because e4 is now sufficiently protected where Karpov can take on b5 and win a pawn. Miles played b4, not wanting to lose a pawn. Karpov played e5 now because he has square for his knight after knight d5. Knight e4, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back, and Karpov castled. So this is very practical play from both sides. White wants an advantage. White wants more development, easier piece placement, control of the center. And Miles wants to get Karpov out of any preparation he has and get sort of a weird position that Miles likes. Miles likes weird positions. Karpov typically doesn't like weird positions. He likes stable, boring positions where he's better. Okay, knight c6, completing development. bishop to d2. Karpov wants to get his bishop off the back row and connect his rooks. Queen c7, putting pressure on the e5 pawn. Not from the pawn, from the queen. Yeah. Okay. c4, which is explosive, that attacks Miles's knight on d5. Miles took on Poussin, so he could keep his knight on d5. Karpov took with the knight, which simultaneously defends his e-pawn enough. Now, if it was Karpov's move, he would play knight takes knight and destroy black's pawn structure in the center. So Miles took the knight, bishop takes, white's position looks pretty nice, black's position looks okay. Knight b4, Miles wants the two bishops. Another practical advice, which I'm going to say a lot this lecture. I'm going to say practical advice and then give you some nugget of wisdom. Grandmasters like the two bishops. Also, engines like the two bishops. A lot of lower rated players like knights, because knights can hop around, and sometimes they do a knight fork that their opponent misses. But grandmasters like bishops, because bishops can travel a long distance in a short period of time, control more squares. So Miles wants the bishop. He figures Karpov probably won't let him take the bishop. And in that instance, maybe Miles could play knight d5, get his other knight to d5. Nice square for the knight. Karpov trades off his dark squared bishop. Karpov likes his white squared bishop. Dark squared bishop was just defending a pawn. Okay, bishop takes. Rook c1, controlling the open file, forcing Miles to lose a tempo. Queen b6. Bishop e4. Black has the two bishops. White doesn't want black to have the two bishops. So he plays bishop e4. And Miles castles. And the whole point of showing this game was my next practical advice. Then, the following two games, I try to refute what Miles said. I don't know if I did a good job. Okay, this game was played in 1980, and a lot of analysts without engines, because it was 1980, they analyzed the Greek gift, bishop takes h7 check, king h7, knight g5 check, etc. And after doing exhaustive analysis with many grandmasters, they concluded that would be very strong for white. And Karpov played knight g5, which is okay. And after the game, they asked Miles, do you think bishop takes h7 is a good sacrifice? And Miles gave the best practical answer I've ever heard. That's why I wanted to show you this game. I remember what he said 45 years ago because it stuck in my head. Miles said, it doesn't matter if the sacrifice is good. I knew Karpov wouldn't play it. So Miles isn't going to spend 15 minutes calculating the sacrifice, determining whether it's good or not, and then allowing it or not allowing it, when he knows, he said he knew, Karpov doesn't play bishop takes h7 check. Maybe Kasparov would. Maybe some other ultra sharp players would, maybe Anand would. But, Anand wouldn't in 1980 because he was probably 10. Or maybe that makes it more likely. He said, Karpov doesn't play bishop takes h7 check. There's no reason to look at it. And I guess he was right. Karpov didn't play bishop takes h7 check. Miles said, it doesn't matter if it's good or not. My opponent's not going to play it. Now, that's 100% practical, and that's 0% like, grandmaster or engine-like. But Miles saved a lot of time on the clock by not analyzing a speculative sacrifice, because Karpov doesn't make speculative sacrifices. Now, I try to refute that argument the next two games I'm going to show you. Karpov played knight g5, attacking the h-pawn, h6, bishop h7 check, king h8, bishop back to b1. Now, this is not a speculative sacrifice. If you take the knight, then white has mate in 2. Queen h5, queen h7 mate. Obviously, Miles can't take the knight. Miles played bishop e7. Now he can take the knight with the bishop, except it's not his turn. Knight e4, putting the knight back in the center. Rook c8. And again, these are all good practical moves. Not losing material, putting the pieces on open, putting the rooks on open files, controlling a lot of squares. Okay, queen d3. And queen d3 is an unusual mistake for Karpov. Again, probably Karpov wants to move his knight somewhere, threatening queen h7 mate. Actually seems pretty reasonable. Miles took the rook on c1, and I don't know if Karpov misunderstood this or missed this, but a lot of people said Karpov just blundered. Okay? He didn't look at what Miles did, which just wins a pawn. First, you take the rook on c1, then you take the pawn on b2. Notice when Karpov's queen was on e2, it was defending the b pawn. Now, if black didn't trade rooks and the rooks were still on the board, white could move the knight off of e4, threatening queen h7 mate. And white has a lot of good knight moves. Probably that's what Karpov was thinking. The b pawn's poisoned. But I guess he didn't reckon with Miles trading rooks first. Now if the knight moves, I play queen takes rook check. Of course, if white's rook was on f1, black's rook was on c8, then can't do that because queen h7's mate. But now queen h7 isn't mate because queen takes c1 is check. So now Miles has the two bishops and he's up a pawn and he's forking the rook and the e-pawn. So queen d3 was sort of an aggressive move, lining up the queen and the bishop in a battery, but now white's losing material. Queen takes e5, black is up 2 pawns. Karpov wins one of his pawns back. Bishop b4 attacks the rook. And queen d5 defends the bishop, makes a battery, trade queens. Black's a pawn up with 2 bishops, so black is just winning. Karpov went into the lost ending because he's a great endgame player. Maybe he can draw the lost ending. After knight takes d5, rook c1 ends in mate. So knight e2, stopping rook c1. g5, advancing pawn majority. h4, white wants to trade pawns. If there's no pawns on the board, that makes it very difficult for black to win. Attacking the a6 pawn. Black centralizes his bishops, 2 bishops. Miles tries to infiltrate with his rook. Karpov wants to trade more pawns. Infiltrates with his rook. Attacks the g2 pawn. Notice g2 pawn is attacked by 2 different pieces. g3, bishop f3. Looks like black's going to win another pawn. Black's 2 pawns up with 2 passed pawns. And in this position, Karpov resigned because he doesn't have any counterplay. Black can play rook c3 next move and defend the bishop in case white attacks it. Then these two pawns are going to win the game eventually. So a lot of people, I think, misunderstood why Karpov lost. And the reaction to that game was Karpov had a winning bishop sacrifice on h7, didn't play it, and ended up losing. That's not really what happened. The bishop sacrifice was correct. Karpov didn't play it, but that's not why he lost. He blundered a pawn later in the game. Some people would argue, especially if I was teaching them, that if Karpov had sacrificed the bishop correctly, then he wouldn't have been in the situation later where he blundered a pawn. But I don't see the two things as related. I mean, it could be bishop takes h7 check was bad. It took grandmasters a lot of analysis to figure out bishop takes h7 check was good, later checked by the engines when engines started to exist. So practically speaking, Miles can claim he won that game because he allowed a strong sacrifice, but he knew Karpov wouldn't play it. If that's not practical, I don't know what is. And by doing that, he saved a lot of time on the clock, and he ended up playing a move that he might not have played if he was more objective than practical. If he was objective and analyzed all the way to the end and figured everything out and concluded white's attack is too strong, I can't allow this bishop sacrifice, then Miles would have played another move. But Miles was certain Karpov wouldn't sacrifice a bishop on speculation, so and ended up winning the game. Okay, now, I don't want to make Karpov look bad, so I'm going to show two games that attempt to refute what Miles said. It's hard to refute it because Karpov did exactly what he thought he was going to do. He didn't sack his bishop. But Karpov was world champion for many years. In my opinion, Karpov is about the fifth best player who ever lived. So it can't be in every situation when Karpov has a strong sacrifice, he doesn't do it. It has to be very speculative. And I'm going to show you two counterexamples where Karpov uses his judgment, sacrifice material, and roll over his world-class opponents. Now, this is a strange happenstance because this is Timman Karpov from Montreal 79. And the reason it's strange is I was at Montreal 79. God damn. Okay, I was 9 years old. And my father, mother, brother, and I drove from Detroit to Montreal. We stopped in Toronto to visit our cousins. And it was the only time I've been to Montreal in my life. And we watched about 3 rounds of this Super GM tournament. It had Karpov, it had Mikhail Tell, it had Lubomir Kovalik, it had Jan Timman, had Bent Larson, had Spassky, and those are the weak players. I didn't name the strong players. Okay, so it was a very strong tournament, and this is one of my favorite games from the tournament. I'm not sure if it's my favorite, but it might be. There's a lot of great games from Montreal 79. Okay, so Karpov's Karpov's black. I said white instead of black. I knew he was black, that's why black's at the bottom. And they played it English, 4-knight English. E3 is a move. Today, G3 is played more often than E3. Black can play bishop E7 or bishop B4 as common moves. Karpov chose bishop E7, D4, traded on D4, castles, knight takes, messing up black's pawn structure. Black says, my pawn structure's messed up, but it's messed up in a good way because I have all these center pawns, so I can control the center. And Mr. Timman, your bishop on c1 is not very good. So now we know practically what people want to do. Black wants to get a big center. Black's going to attack because white's pieces are very passive. Black has a better center. And white wants to get the bishop off of c1 and put it on a better square. Castles. Karpov played bishop d6. For somebody like Karpov, this is easier than easy. For players under 1,000, this might be super complicated. Okay, because it looks like white can just win a pawn because Karpov blocked the defense of his pawn with his bishop. But as every Russian schoolboy knows, black can play bishop takes h2 check and then take the queen. And for Timman and Karpov, that tactic is too easy. On the other hand, there was the game Jutescu-Fischer from the Olympiad where Jutescu lost his queen with that tactic. On move 13, I believe. Man, truth hurts. Okay, so Timman played b3. As I said, Timman wants to improve his bishop. Bishop's not good on c1. Karpov played queen e7. Bishop b2. Very practical play from both sides. And in this position, again, if you try to win a pawn, Karpov can play queen e5, threatening the knight, threatening the rook, and threatening mate. White can save his knight with knight takes knight check, but then when black takes back with the pawn, white's facing losing the rook in the corner and queen h2 mate. So Timman didn't fall for that. Bishop b2, d takes c4. Now white's actually threatening the pawn on d5. Now Timman has a tough choice to make regarding recapturing. Strategically, bc doesn't look very good. It gives white two isolated pawns on the queen side. Structurally, bishop takes c4 looks a lot better. White has a great pawn structure, but then black can get an attack on the king side because the bishop isn't controlling g4 anymore. So Karpov has knight g4, bishop g4. Maybe he'll do that sacrifice that he didn't do against Miles. And Timman didn't like that, so he played b takes c4. He didn't like all those tactical possibilities. Karpov played rook b8, attacking the bishop, putting his rook on an open file. And those are the little things that grandmasters do all the time, which practically lower rated players need to do more, which is improve your position. So the rook on a8 isn't very good. The rook on b8 is fantastic. It's controlling a whole file and it's attacking something. Queen c1, Timman defends his bishop. Knight g4. Karpov goes for the attack because Karpov sees that Timman's pieces are mainly on the queen side. Now Karpov is threatening the h2 pawn. If white takes the knight, then black gets the two bishops. Black can still attack. So Timman played g3. Now, this game was played 1 year before the Miles game, and I assume Miles knew this game, so I don't know what he was talking about. Karpov won't sacrifice. Karpov played rook e8, putting the rook on an open file, just like putting this rook on an open file and putting pressure on e3. Knight d1. Timman defends e3 more and defends his bishop more. Otherwise, his queen could have been overworked. And now knight takes h2. Karpov's not afraid to sacrifice. He just does it when he knows it's good. If he's not sure, He's not going to speculate. In this position, Timman confused the audience, which is you, and played c5, attacking the bishop. If king takes h2, queen h4 check, if you try to defend your g-pawn, I can force you back. Then I have bishop takes check, queen takes check. Now black can play rook e6, threatening rook h6 mate. Not easy to stop rook h6 mate. You can do it, but it's not easy. In fact, it might be stronger to play rook takes bishop, so that when you play rook e6, white can't play bishop to f6. Because probably in this position, bishop f6 is the only move. Okay, so Karpov could also play rook e4, threatening rook h4 mate. Then Timman would have to play rook f4, which seems sufficient. Okay, and Timman didn't like that for white. Karpov liked it for black. So Timman said, I have an idea. I'll play c5, and if the bishop takes the pawn, then I can take the knight, and there's no queen h4 check. And if you're in Karpov's shoes, you have to see the move c5. You can't be like, he has to play king takes knight, queen h4 check, and I'm winning after my great analysis. Not my great analysis, Karpov's great analysis. Karpov had to see c5. He played knight takes f1, c takes d6, knight takes g3, and this is the move Timman missed. And I know it because Timman said, that's the move I missed. He thought Karpov would take on d6 one way or the other, then take on f1. White has two pieces for a rook and two pawns. White has the two bishops. Black has no attack. Unclear. Position's okay for white. But Karpov must have seen knight takes g3 when he played knight takes h2. And this threatens knight takes e2 check. And to be a good practical player, when you sacrifice your knight, you have to look at them capturing your knight, and you also have to look at alternatives. And most lower rated players don't look at alternatives. When they sacrifice, they're always like, he must take it, and then I have this forced win. And sometimes they're wrong about that too. Okay, so if you take the queen, then black is up material. Black's up the exchange and a couple of pawns. So white can resign. Okay, so Timman took the knight. Oh, give me the knight. And this position is much worse for white than before black desperadoed his knight. Now white's king side is totally messed up. Black still has an attack. Black's threatening the g3 pawn. Played king f2, defending the g3 pawn. Queen h6. Karpov's going to come in here and start attacking. Timman sets up for the next game. Terrible. Pinning the bishop. Now black can try to play bishop a6 or bishop g4, attacking the pinned bishop. Knight b2, bishop a6, knight d3, blocking the bishop. Karpov takes the knight. The bishop's pinned, so king takes. And rook a d8. And the king can't survive. You can't have your king on d3 in the middle game when black has a queen and two rooks. Bishop f1, always play bishop f1. Good practical advice. Check. And c5, attacking the bishop. Bishop takes c5 is the only move. Queen c6, pinning the bishop to the king. king has to go to the b file because we need to protect our bishop. If you play queen a3, you will know Karpov is the lord when he plays rook takes e3 check. Okay, but super GMs don't fall for stuff like that. They see when things are pinned. So he unpinned his bishop and defended it. Rook b8 check. And white has no hope here. King a3, rook e5. We're attacking the bishop. Bishop moves away to most squares. Rook a5 is mate. Man, truth hurts. If the bishop goes to b4, which stops rook a5 mate, then rook takes e3 check. Man, that's worse than mate. Look at this. Man, that's terrible. Okay, but in the game, rook takes e3 check, hangs the rook. It's a good thing this actually happened, or I never would have noticed. Karpov played queen b6, which is better than me hanging the rook. Now, black is threatening queen takes b4 checkmate, rook takes e3 check, which is now protected. This is why I lecture instead of play. And rook a5 check, which will lead to mate shortly. And this position, Timman resigned. If you're just joining the lecture, you skip through most of it. You probably would be surprised to hear that white castled kingside this game. So Karpov was sacking material, forcing Timman's king to the other side of the board, taking everything, taking names, and Karpov crushed Timman. Karpov tied for first in Montreal with Mikhail Tal. They both got 10 out of 14. If I remember, what is it, 46 years ago? How can I not remember? As an aside, to confuse the audience, there's two Laskers you should have heard of. Emanuel Lasker, who was the world chess champion, and Edward Lasker, who was a very strong player. In fact, one of the most famous games ever is the game Edward Lasker beat Sir George Thomas. If you look that game up, you've probably seen it already. Edward Lasker sacks his queen, and Thomas walks his king all the way to the first rank and gets mated. God damn. Anyway, you might be saying, Mr. Finegold, when you should say Mr. Grandmaster Finegold, sir, why are you talking about Edward Lasker? What does that have to do with this game? You will be very surprised to know that I saw Edward Lasker at this tournament. God damn. So he won famous games in the 1910s, and then 1979, I saw him at a tournament. And I asked him what school he went to, and he said old school. He was in his 90s. He didn't live too much longer, but I saw Edward Lasker. God damn, I'm old. Okay, and I've actually played Arthur Dake, who was also about 80 when I played him. So I've seen and played against people who played chess in the 19-teens and 1920s. Man, didn't realize how old I was. Okay, so that was a very strong tournament. Because the tournament was so strong in Montreal, dignitaries like Edward Lasker showed up to watch all the super grandmasters, as did my family. Now, you might be saying, but Grandmaster Finegold, sir, showing me this game Karpov won, that's just one game. I'm sure Karpov never sacrificed material and had brilliant mating attacks. That sounds more like Garry Kasparov. Okay, here's a famous game between Karpov and Korchnoi. This was their candidates final, which Karpov won by 1 point. As a consequence, Karpov was supposed to play Fischer after this match. Fischer famously didn't play. Karpov's world champion. So this is the de facto world championship. Karpov's white and a dragon. And you might think, man, Karpov is going to play really positional and strategical and so forth. And the answer is fries. Karpov sacrifices material, opposite side castles, plays for mate, and outcalculates Korchnoi. So what was Tony Mouse talking about? Okay, so they played the mainline Yugoslavian attack, or Yugoslav attack. And this is 1974, so it was 1974 theory. Although it's de facto world championship, so players play pretty good. You can still see this played today. This variation is still happening. But in the 70s and 80s, it was happening a lot. Okay, and this is a main theoretical position. White has many ways to play. Karpov played the Karpov way. Knight e2, defending his knight with his other knight so that there's never any exchange sacrifices, which black often plays in the dragon. Now Karpov plays for mate. Rook c8. Maybe Korchnoi will set 2 exchanges. He's got 1 exchange, 2 exchanges, 1 for each of you. Rook d3. Karpov defends his knight a million times, so there's no double exchange sacrifices. Rook c5, stopping Karpov from playing g5, because I can take it. Or so he thought. g5, confusing Korchnoi. So Karpov already sacrificed his h-pawn. Now Karpov is sacrificing his g-pawn. Korchnoi set him up 2 pawns. Good. And now Karpov played rook d5, which is hanging to a knight and a rook. So Karpov is threatening the queen, and Karpov's also threatening the rook. So black's got to do something. Black played rook takes d5. If you take with the knight, then I could take the rook on g5, and you can't move your knight because your queen is hanging. On the other hand, I'm threatening pawn takes knight, queen takes knight, and knight takes knight. And I just said you can't move your knight. So that's not good. Okay, so Korchnoi took with the rook. Karpov took with the knight. He says, why don't we trade knights? And then I won't take back. I'll just checkmate you. Korchnoi said, I'm not going to do that. And Karpov said, fine. Then I'll play knight takes e7 check. And I'll win your rook in the corner. And Korchnoi said, no, you're not going to do that either. Korchnoi played rook e8. So he stopped what he was doing. Karpov played knight f4. He's got 2 knights, 1 for each of you. Now, some of you think this is mate, but it's not mate because Korchnoi can run away. Run away. Karpov and Korchnoi both saw that. Karpov played knight f4 because practically, whether you calculate as well as Karpov or not, and you don't, you want all your pieces to attack. Now, this is a Sicilian dragon where they castled opposite sides. White has all 4 of his pieces attacking, and black has the queen on a5. That's not as good. Korchnoi played bishop c6 because after the knight takes, white wants to play knight d5, get his other knight in there, and Korchnoi says, no, you're not going to do that. I defend everything. I'm Korchnoi. e5, confusing the audience. It didn't confuse Korchnoi or Karpov, it just confused you. Okay, and Karpov's idea, and again, Miles is like, Karpov doesn't sacrifice unless he sees what's happening and he knows. If you take the pawn, I take the knight, I play knight h5, threatening queen g7 mate. If you take my knight, I play rook g1 check. That's why Karpov played e5. He's stopping black from sacrificing the queen and having a rook, a bishop, and a pawn for a queen. Now it's just mate. Now it's king h8 mate. If you don't like that mate, you're like, I'm watching this lecture. I want a better mate. Okay, this mate wins a pawn. So you like that mate better. Okay, Karpov and Korchnoi both see that. Also, Korchnoi's knight's hanging. And if Korchnoi plays knight takes knight, I just do the same thing. Knight h5, and then rook g1 check, and queen g7 mate. Okay, so Korchnoi's on his heels. he plays bishop takes d5, avoiding all that stuff I said. E takes f6, threatening checkmate. E takes f6. Now, sometimes you checkmate your opponent and you're only thinking about checkmating your opponent. And this is more practical advice, which was recommended by the sponsor to give practical advice. When you're thinking, you have to think about the whole chessboard. You can't think about what you're doing and forget what your opponent's doing. Knight h5 leads to unstoppable mate. Unfortunately, black has the unstoppable mate. God damn. Rook e1 check, and because black played e takes f6 last move, black is checkmating white. This would still be a famous game if Karpov did that, but Karpov wouldn't like the reason it was famous. If Karpov had done that, it's possible it would have been Korchnoi Fischer, and Korchnoi would have been world champion. But, okay, Karpov didn't hang mate. So black has threats too. Queen takes h7 check. Queen h8 check. And now, if the king goes to e7, he's blocking his own threat. And in this position, Korchnoi resigned. If Korchnoi plays king e7, I play knight takes d5 check and rook e1 check. And I either win your rook or I win your queen for a rook. So in that game, Karpov made several sacrifices, outcalculated his opponent, and ended up winning pretty quickly. And he won the match by 1 point. So this was a very important game. Karpov played super tactical. Karpov's Karpov. He can play anyway, but Miles didn't believe it. Miles said in that first game, he's not going to sack a bishop and not know what's going on. In this game, he was sacrificing, and he did know what was going on. He calculated it out, and calculation was immaculate. And he beat Korchnoi very quickly. Black got that one mate threat in. That was black's only threat of the game. White was making threats the whole game. Okay, it's much later than I thought it was going to be. So I'll show you one more thing. I guess my games aren't very important compared to Karpov. I'm gonna show you the end of this game. This was played in England at a junior tournament that I played at in 1986. That's where I met Anand. Okay, practically speaking and objectively speaking, black is completely winning. And black didn't play practically here. Black tried to figure it all out. When you're up 2 pawns for nothing, you shouldn't have to figure it all out. In this position, f6 surprisingly is the best move. That's because this was played in 86, and I didn't have my rules then. But my opponent on move 40 played, oh, I'm sorry, it's white's move, g4. Okay, f6 is the best move. Black's winning. My opponent played a4, which is also winning. And unfortunately for him, a4 was his 40th move. After rook b8, he thought a long time. If he was in time trouble, he probably would play bishop e7 because his bishop's attacked. But instead, he calculated and figured it out and played the losing move. It's not a practical move. It's the move the engine would play if it wins. But this was 1986, so there weren't any good engines. If you can play like an engine and calculate to the end, or you can play practically and just win simply, then you have to do that. Bishop e7 is winning. White doesn't have enough attack. Black has defense. There's check. And one of the lines the engine gave, which is funny, is rook g7, rook takes, queen. And now white's threatening rook takes e6 mate. So black wins by queen b1 and queen g6. And black's up too much material. Black has a passed b pawn, etc. That's one of the engine lines. My opponent played the losing move. Instead of playing bishop e7, even though I can't stop his 2 passed pawns, so practically you have to take time out, stop your opponent's counterplay, and queen your 2 pawns later, but my opponent couldn't wait. And my opponent's name is Alex Kuznecov from Canada. I never heard of him after this tournament. I never saw him again or played him. He played a3, sacrificing his bishop, and then a2, and I can't stop him from promoting if rook a8, rook a5. So he thought he's queening with check, and my attack isn't strong enough, so he wins. But he was wrong. After check, king h6, white has one move that wins. Some of you have seen this before, because I've lectured on this before. If you haven't, or you forgot, both likely, pause the video and try to find the only winning move for white. Okay, the answer is h4, put it in h, threatening h takes g5 checkmate. He queened. I should play king h2, but I cost myself a move by playing king g2. It doesn't matter. He has to stop h takes g5 mate, plays f6, never play f6, and then I mate next move, either by taking or playing g5. Somewhere in the YouTube comments, somebody's going to say, you don't mate next move, queen g1 check, rook b1 check. Okay. So he played g takes h4. Again, white has one winning move, knight f6. Now I'm threatening g5 mate. He played h3 check. If I had played king h2 when he promoted, he wouldn't have h3 check. But now I could play king h2. And the truth hurts. If I don't play king h2, I'm not winning. And his queen can come in and start checking me. And now he resigned because it's going to be checkmate. There's no stalemates because this pawn can always move. If he sacks his rook and his queen, this pawn can move. So no, I knew there was no stalemates when I saw you could play e5. So I won a game I should have lost. That's because my opponent wasn't practical. Instead of stopping my attack before promoting his pawns, he said, that attack doesn't work. I calculated it out. And then he queened, and then my attack worked, and as a consequence, he lost. So practically, you want to stop your opponent's counterplay like Karpov, and since I didn't play Karpov, I played somebody you've never heard of. He didn't stop my counterplay, and even though he promoted, I still won the game. So remember, since I'm on the internet a lot, don't lose to me, because you'll see your games published on the internet with me denouncing your play. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. This has been practical chess advice for intermediate players, mainly looking at games of Anatoly Karpov, and now he was a great practical player. And even the best players in the world, like Karpov, lose occasionally. If you don't want to lose at chess ever, I have good practical advice. You have to stop playing. Anybody who plays chess loses. Carlsen loses, Ferrugia loses, Nakamura loses, Anand loses. Everybody loses. So practically, you have to go with the flow. If you lose, it's okay. You have to have that attitude. Try to get rid of your opponent's counterplay. Try to play simple moves. Don't try to do too much, and you'll see your results improve. Thanks again to Anonymous. If you'd like to sponsor a lecture, you can look at the details of the video and see Karen's contact information. And then you too can sponsor a video on the topic of your choice. Thanks for watching, everybody. Sorry we went so long. I didn't have time to look at my other terrible games, but that was good for you guys. Bye, everybody.